Greetings, everyone. It's just about 12 noon, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Tricia Morris in Albuquerque, New Mexico with 1615, and we welcome you to today's webinar. I'm the Director of Operations at 1615, and I'm sitting in for Matthew Ellison today. Today's webinar is called 1 Billion Weight. 1 billion people live in the shadow of Buddhism, but their spiritual plight is little understood by the church. The scope of Buddhism's influence on the world is huge, and so is the challenge of communicating the gospel to Buddhist peoples. We will consider the basic philosophic teachings of the Buddha to see how communicating the gospel using Western thought patterns is easily misunderstood. We'll also learn 5 effective principles of communicating the gospel to Buddhists and get a glimpse of the need for church planting among them. Today's subject matter expert is Steve Nefakis. He serves as Bridge Asia Ministry Director at OMF International. OMF International worldwide unites around a common call and passion. God has given OMF a heart for Asia and a desire to bring His hope to billions. It is OMF's desire to partner with the global church to see individual lives and whole communities redeemed through Jesus. OMF's vision is to plant churches and nurture in ways that equip the believers to grow God's kingdom among those around them. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Steve, but first, a couple of details. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. So if any time your computer starts giving you some trouble, just call in on your phone with the phone number and the code on the email that you received. Your phones will be muted to preserve sound quality. Now, as we go along and some questions come to mind, please go ahead and type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing questions for the last 15 minutes of our time together. Over 90 people are registered for today's live webinar, so it's also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next couple of weeks. I will now be turning it over to Steve. It will take just a few minutes for the handoff. So Steve, I really thank you for sharing and being with us today. There you go.
Thank you, Tricia. Well, greetings from Dallastown, Pennsylvania. As Tricia said, my name is Steve Nefakis, and I am married with 4 children. I'm trying to change these slides, Tricia. I'm not sure if I can do that yet. Okay, there we go. I have 9 grandchildren. The Lord had led my wife and I to serve Him in central Thailand for about 17 years. And central Thailand is a very heavily populated area of Buddhist thought and philosophy. Holly and I worked in evangelism and church planting, and in our final term we worked as the director of our Language and Culture Orientation Center in a city called Lopburi. We work with OMF International, which is an international interdenominational mission agency founded by Hudson Taylor in 1865. In fact, this year we are celebrating our 150th anniversary. These are some of the icons or some of the logos that we've had down through the ages. The one in the top left there was when Hudson Taylor was directing the mission, and the one that's in the bottom right, we just put together this year for this year's 150th year celebration. One of the exciting things that I heard just recently was that in China, over 1,000 Chinese pastors gathered together to celebrate this 150th anniversary because they trace back their roots to the ministry of Hudson Taylor back in the 1800s. And so some of the distinctives of OMF International are that in all ways not sinful. We want to become as much like the Chinese people as possible. This was Hudson Taylor's saying, and we use that as we think about some of the other people groups that we work with. We also trust in God as a God provider. We utilize the gifting of lay people. We're in it to establish an indigenous biblical church capable of reproducing itself. So in 1949, the CIM had almost 900 missionaries in China, and it was estimated that there were approximately 200,000 Christians who found their faith through the ministry of the CIM. Today, the Chinese church is estimated to be over 100 million strong and growing, and so we're very, very excited to see what's happening in that part of the world today. East Asia is not as homogeneous as many might imagine. There are hundreds of people groups with their own cultures and languages, and so there's not just one way to approach them all. After leaving China in 1950, the CIM missionaries began to work in some of the other countries that were surrounding China. The Buddhist influence, as we think about it, we use this saying, 1 billion weight, which is the title of this particular seminar. Alex Smith was the one that came up with that number of 1 billion people. As he did some research, he discovered that there are not necessarily 1 billion Buddhists, but there are 1 billion people that are influenced by the philosophies of Buddhism and in different parts of the world. Most Buddhist countries in East Asia are less than 1% Christian, and there are also about 86% of all Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists did not know even one Christian, so there's no way for them to even hear the message of salvation. As we look at East Asia, we recognize that there are at least 294 unreached people groups, and 129 of them are still unengaged. In other words, there is no Christian witness in those parts of the world. When we think about that term, 1 billion weight, so I've just been talking about the billion, but the word weight actually came to us as we were thinking about a story about Hudson Taylor meeting a Chinese man called Mr. Li, and how this man approached Hudson Taylor and asked him how long his country had the message. And when Taylor responded hundreds of years, he said, "My father and grandfather died without hearing the message. Why did it take so long for you to bring it?" And so we believe today that there are still many millions of people in East Asia that are waiting to hear the gospel. As we think about East Asia, this is a map of the countries that OMF International works in, and you can see from the map that different parts of East Asia have different concentrations of Buddhists. In the orange countries, those are 20 to 25%. The blue are 50 to 70, and the green are 70 to 98%. The ones that are sort of in that tan color are predominantly, well, the Philippines would be Roman Catholic, and Indonesia, of course, would be Muslims. And so you could see that this is not all the countries that represent the Buddhist world. They are just the primary countries that we are looking at as an organization. There are three vehicles or routes to enlightenment in Buddhism. We think about Mahayana Buddhism, which is Northeast Asia. That would include China and North Korea. Japan had that influence as the gospel traveled from Korea to Japan. We think of Hinayana, which is another sect, which is more in Southeast Asia, and Vajrayana, which is Tibetan Buddhism. Each of these is different. Perhaps we could think in terms of Christianity, where we have Roman Catholicism and we have Protestantism. We have other large sectors or groups of Christians who follow particular traditions and theologies. But in Buddhism, there are actually thousands of different sects. there are two major fronts where the Christian view is being attacked. We think of Islam and Buddhism, where Islam, we think of it as an aggressive religion that has used physical and psychological methodology in order to destroy Christianity, and it's very much in your face. It's confrontational, and so our eyes tend to look in that direction. Buddhism is actually more covert. It sneaks in the back door and it works quietly in the background. It gained popularity in the West with the hippie movement. Even the Beatles promoted a lot of Eastern thought, and the baby boomer generation has been strongly influenced by Buddhist thought. Buddhism has been more open to adaptation than most religions, and though this adaptation has through this adaptation, inroads have been made into popular Western culture. Some people have said that Islam is like a rock and Buddhism is like a sponge. In fact, we can say without people becoming Buddhists, many have embraced Buddhist teaching. And so as we look at the world around us, even here in the United States, we would find that many people who would not claim to be Buddhists, when you talk to them, that you would discover that philosophically they have accepted much of the Buddhist thought. I was thinking it would be interesting to do research to find out which of these two religions have a greater impact on our way of life. That might make a good DMin dissertation for anybody that might want to do that. We're finding that the West is becoming Eastern. We think that there are approximately 10 million Americans who claim to be Buddhists. 25% of the British population now believes in reincarnation. And Buddhism is said to be the fastest growing religion in Australia today. Hollywood actors are embracing Buddhism and perpetuating a lot of Buddhist thought. When you think about even movies like The Matrix, which is a very interesting movie, it had both Christian and Buddhist elements in it. It even achieved cult status with its haunting question, what is real? An unprecedented number of Westerners are practicing Eastern meditation techniques. Richard Greer is becoming a spokesman for the Dalai Lama and Tantric Buddhism. And those being influenced in America are primarily white, upper class, highly educated, and female. I wish we could have some interaction here, but I would ask the question, where do you see Buddhism influencing the West? What are some of the areas of influence? And we could see that pluralism, the adaptability of creating your own path to enlightenment, animism, tolerance, are all some of the influences of Buddhism on Western philosophy and thought. I wrote this when I was thinking about who would be attracted to Buddhism. Buddhism speaks to the troubled individual who is seeking peace without a God who will hold them accountable. It makes the forces of nature their God and makes them accountable only to themselves. This person would place a high value on his or her independence, but cannot find peace in atheism, so he or she turns inward to find peace within. This is the ultimate expression of individualism, and when carried out on a mass level, it fragments the corporate structure of society and turns it into a society of self-seeking individuals. It is the ultimate in designer religions. And this last part here about fragmenting corporate structure, I saw this a lot when I was living in Thailand, in the way that very few people can actually work together. So the East is becoming more Western as well. It's not just the West adapting to the East, but the East adapting to the West. There is a thing called Buddhist contextualization. We're finding that Buddhist leaders are contextualizing their message, like the Dalai Lama, who wrote a book called The Art of Happiness. And in it, he says, the purpose of life is to discover happiness. Well, nowhere in Buddhism do you actually find that message, but it is designed to attract the Western mindset. Some Buddhist leaders are traveling globally to teach Buddhism. In the past, and even in Thailand, many monks will not even get into a car. They always walk, but we're finding now that they're getting in jets and flying around the world. Buddhist leaders are using the internet. And this picture that's in the bottom there was a picture I took at Thammasat University with Buddhist priests who were studying, and some of them are becoming economists and getting degrees in computer sciences. They are using this technology to spread the message of Buddhism. And Buddhism is publishing is on the increase. So why has it been so difficult to communicate the gospel to Buddhists? Well, a huge challenge in reaching Buddhists is the challenge of communicating a compelling message that reaches their heart. There are many barriers to understanding the gospel. The problem of coding and decoding the message. We find that the coding has to do with what is the language that we use to communicate the gospel, and how is that language understood is the decoding of the message. And so language is a really, really important component of the communicating of the gospel. Here's an example. In Psalm 24, 3 and 5, it says, "Who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart." Well, when we look at that, we think of pure hands as being hands that are free of sin. But in some Buddhist cultures, they would say that that clean hands means that the person has never worked and is lazy. And so, although we're trying to communicate one message, they hear something else. I remember reading something by Alan Johnson, who was teaching English in Bangkok, and he asked the question when he was telling the story about Peter, the fisherman. He asked, why did Peter fall on his knees and say that he was a sinful man? And one person raised his hand and said, because he killed all of those fish. And so the concept of sin to the Buddhist is very different than what it is to us. And so in order to communicate cross-culturally, we must not only exegete scripture, but we must exegete the culture and also the religion so that we understand how they understand the world around them. I'd like to talk about the origins. I can't say very much about that because we're time limited, but one of the things that many Buddhists would say to us is that Siddhartha Gautama was actually born 560 years before Christ, and they see that as meaning that Buddhism is actually older than Christianity, and therefore it must be better. Enlightenment is the main objective of many Buddhists, and that means they are trying to achieve a state of mind where you can stop thinking about yourself and your own needs completely. There are three stages of enlightenment as Buddha saw it. First, he saw his previous lives pass before him. Secondly, he saw the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, birth, death, and rebirth, this cycle that just keeps going around as he thought about reincarnation. And thirdly, he thought about the four holy truths which were revealed to him. And those were the knowledge of suffering. And that is the basic premise of Buddhism, that in Christianity we think that sin is the basic problem of the human condition of the person, but in Buddhism, suffering is the basic human condition. And so the knowledge of suffering is a huge problem. The cause of suffering is that we have desire for transient things. And the removal of suffering is that it can be removed if we stop desiring things that are temporary. And the way to eliminate things that are temporary, or the desire for things that are temporary, are the Eightfold Path. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the Eightfold Path because this is where a lot of the different sects of Buddhism actually differ in the application of Buddhism. It's impossible to really present a comprehensive view of Buddhism because there are so many different ways that Buddhists see it. And most of it, the differences are in the areas of application. So I'm going to skip those, and I want to talk about three core beliefs and three universal truths. The three core beliefs are that that karma is really the thing that affects your fate. It's determined by your good or bad actions. The second core belief is that there is a reincarnation, that when you die, you are reborn in accordance to the actions of your previous life. And nirvana is the third core principle. And nirvana would be the equivalent to our heaven, except it's very different in that there is no existence there. And it shows that it's the end of suffering and the end of the reincarnation cycle. So the three universal truths would be that everything is impermanent, that there's nothing that doesn't change. The immutability of God would be challenged by this doctrine of, or this universal truth of impermanence, because they say and they believe that everything must be changing all the time. They would say that what exists is changeable, and what is not changeable does not exist. So in reality, the idea of nirvana is really that it doesn't change, and therefore it does not exist. So to pass to nirvana means to pass into non-existence. The second area of I'm sorry, I'm going back here. Yeah, so the suffering is the second point, which is the word dukkha, which means that people everywhere suffer all the time. It disassociates suffering from sin in this world, and it attributes all suffering to the deeds of our past life. This means that a person who is suffering greatly in this life cannot actually change his condition of suffering, because that is his karma. That is the result of his previous existence's sin. And so therefore, all they can do is hope to create better merit or more merit in order to have a better reincarnation in their next life. The third universal truth that they agree on is this idea of anatta, which means that people have no identity, that the concept of the eternal human soul is not a reality. It's not true. The Buddhists would reject the idea that the human soul is eternal. So if there is no soul, then there is no soul to save. Now, what I want to do now is I want to just spend a few minutes going over John 3:16 and to show you how these various doctrines affect the world, the way that the average Buddhist would understand some of the words that we use in communicating the gospel. So we're all very familiar with John 3:16 and 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. So let's have a look at how a Buddhist who is deeply steeped in Buddhism would understand this according to Buddhist thought. So the first words are for God. God is, to us, is the absolute. To the Buddhist sees that karma is actually what determines people's future. And karma is impersonal versus a personal God. Karma is been described as the iron law of of the universe where it cannot be changed. It's a law like gravity, and you can't overcome it. So that's one of the difficulties when we just talking about God. Who is God? They have no concept of God. Many people think that Buddhists believe that Buddha was God. They don't believe that. They believe that Buddha was a man who discovered who became enlightened and discovered the path to enlightenment and to nirvana. The next part is that God so loved the world. And here the Buddhists would have a problem of emotion. It's personality versus this iron law of karma. To love someone means that you need to have a personality. You need to have emotions. To the Buddhist, emotions are actually anathema because they believe that emotions are actually very deceptive. And so to love someone is really a negative thing. Even in the life of Buddha, we would read that he actually left his wife and his child to discover enlightenment, and this was not seen as a negative thing. This was a good thing because he was detaching himself from the very things that kept him, that gave him this desire, and so he had to give up every desire, even his wife and his child. The next one is when we're talking about the world, the nature of things, the universe. We see the world as transitory. We see it as something that's moving, that God has created. But to the Buddhist, according to Buddhist philosophy, that the universe is really only an illusion, and that not to place any faith or any hope in it. The next concept is that God gave his one and only Son. Just like when you talk to a Muslim and you tell them that God has a son, they're highly offended by this idea. They would have difficulty in saying that Jesus was the Son of God. The nature of Christ is foreign to them, and they see him as being human and not as a God-man as we would see him. And so they would have difficulty with this idea that God could have a son. That whosoever, this has to do with our soulishness. Who are we? What is our nature? And to the Buddhists, the human does not necessarily have a soul as we would consider a soul, thinking that we have this eternal soul. They would say that the human being is actually soulless in his essence, and that even in the reincarnation, it is not his soul that's being reincarnated. It's something else. I've tried asking this question many times to Buddhists, and they were not able to try and explain the idea of what actually is reincarnated into the next life. The next thing is the idea of belief or faith versus merit. To the Buddhist, merit is the only way of achieving a better reincarnation. The idea of faith and being able to save one is totally insufficient in Buddhism. And so we have this tremendous clash of worldview here where the Buddhist would trust in his merit over faith and cannot possibly understand how a person could be saved by faith alone. Shall not perish describes the nature of our sin and the cosmic consequences. The cosmic consequences to the Buddhists have to do with their karma determining what they are going to be reincarnated as. And so a person who lives a sinful life in this life, perhaps he's a butcher and he kills animals, Well, in his next life, he will be reincarnated as an animal that will eventually be butchered. And so they see that the consequences of our actions today carry forward into our next life. For us, it's rebellion against the holy God. That is the nature of sin to the Christian. And so the Buddhist has a difficulty trying to understand that, but have eternal life. And so here we come to this idea of nirvana versus heaven, this idea of the quenching of our existence in nirvana. It's been described as the blowing out of a candle. Your life is the flame, which really doesn't have any substance. It's just light. And yet, when you die, and if you were to achieve the highest state of being reborn again, or you would escape the cycle of reincarnation, you would enter into this state of nothingness, versus our idea of heaven. So these are some of the differences. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world. Here again, I don't want to keep going over this, but the whole idea of reincarnation as being a part of their worldview, while we believe that there's a judgment. The thing that affects us here is that the Thai person is a pluralist, and they would also avoid judging others as well. And so there's no way of judging right and wrong in somebody else's life. Only your karma can do that. So the last part is to save the world through him. It has to do with the provision of redemption, earned merit, versus the substitutionary atonement, where the idea of substitutionary atonement is very foreign to the Buddhists, because they believe that every bit of merit has to be earned on your own, and for somebody else to die for your sins goes totally contrary to the philosophy of Buddhism. And so we've got to try and find ways of communicating how in their culture are there any examples of substitutionary atonement? Is there ways of that in Buddhism people can transfer merit from one person to another? Now, anybody that was a pure Buddhist would say that there is no way of doing that. But we have found some examples that we have used in communicating the gospel that show that in Buddhism, a majority of people actually do accept the idea of merit transference. And so the Dalai Lama has said we must take direct responsibility for our own spiritual lives and rely upon nobody and nothing. If another being were able to save us, surely he would have already done so. It is time, therefore, that we help ourselves. And I'm wondering whether this was a particular stab at the Christian idea where he says, surely somebody would have already done so if somebody else was able to save us. And this is a very important concept to understand here, that the Buddhist believes that he must make his own merit. So what's the basic difference between Christianity and Buddhism? And D.T. Niles has come up with these two ideas, that the basic difference between Christianity and Buddhism is that the Buddha saw that life was meaningless and in itself set out to rescue men from meaninglessness, while Jesus, on the other hand, saw that life could become meaningful in God and set out to call men to share in that meaning. And I think that's a beautiful description of the differences between Buddhism and Christianity. So here's a quick summary. In Buddhism, denies the concept of a supreme personal God. They hold to the idea of karma, this iron law of nature, which determines our future. That Jesus was a good man, a prophet, and the founder of the Christian faith. So many Buddhists would actually say that they would believe in some of Jesus's teachings. And they would often say to me, it's the same thing. His moral teachings are the same and that all religions teach people to be good, and therefore they are good. And so for a Buddhist to accept the exclusive claim of Jesus that he was the only savior would be seen as being exclusivistic. Man is not a spiritual being. People are impermanent and transitory, and all life is meaningless. So these are the three main principles that we need to keep in mind when we communicate with the Buddhists. So how is it that we're going to, what are the principles of communication? First of all, we need to have two-sided discussion. Very often, Christians go in and they want to just sort of explain the four spiritual laws, or they'll use some proof text to show that they're lost, and try and convince people that they need to come to Christ. But unless we understand what they believe, and each one believes in a different thing. And one of the things I found in talking with Buddhists is that almost every Buddhist has different assumptions about Buddhism, and therefore we must understand what they believe. So it needs to be a two-sided discussion where we begin by asking them what they believe, and then trying to find ways of talking about that. It needs to be person-centered. It needs to be about people rather than ideas and philosophies and theories. And so to talk to people about themselves and their own lives and their families. It needs to be incarnational. They must see the way of Christ lived out before them in ways that they can see and understand it before they will ever come to accept it. We must be compassionate, and we must experience their lives and help them to understand how they can live their lives and how Jesus is a solution to their specific issues and problems. And it must also be verdict-orientated, which means that there needs to be sensitive discussion. The Christian must be able to sensitively point out contradictions of some of the Buddhist beliefs. And I remember the most revealing statement that was made to me was that when we approach a Buddhist, we need to approach them with a mirror and not a hammer, and help them to see themselves before they will ever see Christ. So some of the things that, if you're praying for Buddhists, pray that the Lord will raise up more missionaries that have an interest in researching Buddhist thought. There's still a lot of work to do in this, and especially in ways in which the Christian gospel interacts with Buddhist thought. Pray the Lord will help missionaries develop an apologetic to answer some of the philosophical questions that Buddhists are asking. And pray for more churches to be aware of the spiritual needs of Buddhist people. How can churches be involved in reaching the Buddhist world? Here are some ideas. Diaspora work in the U.S. amongst Buddhist communities. Maybe there are groups of Thai or Cambodians or Vietnamese people around your church. Can your church actually find ways of reaching out to them? Adopt a Buddhist people group in East Asia or somewhere else in the world, and become a part of the solution of bringing the message of salvation to them. Partner with an Asian American or other ethnic church in reaching Buddhist peoples. We have Asian American churches coming up all over the place in the United States, and it wouldn't be too difficult to approach one of these churches and ask how you can work together to try and bring the gospel to Asians and to Buddhists. Providing gospel platforms through missional business, or partner with an Asian church in the U.S. to connect with their Buddhist homeland. I know of a church in Washington, D.C. who is very committed to reaching Thai people in Bangkok, and every year they take a trip there. Wouldn't it be great if another church could come alongside them and go with them? Begin a sister church relationship with a church in a majority Buddhist country. Partner with indigenous mission movements in Buddhist areas, and send long and short-term workers to explore ways in which your church can become involved in reaching out to the Buddhist world. So here are just some next step resources. I'm going to stop in a minute. I think I'm on schedule to give you 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes for our questions. Some of the resources that I've used for this presentation were a book called Poles Apart, written by John R. Davis. John was actually a professor at Payao Bible Institute in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and is a very good book on helping you understand the differences between the East and the West. Sharing Jesus in the Buddhist World by Spalding and Lin. Communicating Christ in the Buddhist World by Dinu Lim and Lim. Buddhism Through Christian Eyes by Alex Smith, he was an OMF missionary in central Thailand, probably one of the leading experts on Thai Buddhism in the United States today. And then the New Buddhism could give you some insights as to why Americans are becoming Buddhists. If you're interested in a resource sheet, if you want more resources than what's on this page, please feel free to email me at that email address, and I'd be happy to send that to you. So Trish, I'm not sure how we go from here to questions, but I'm not sure.
Wonderful. That was such great information, Steve. Thank you so much. One of the first questions as I'm scrolling through here and looking through some of the questions we've been given today, have you found that here and abroad that Buddhists are open to hearing what you have to say about Christianity, or it sounds kind of complicated?
Yeah, it is complicated, but the good news is that they are open to hearing. I find that East Asians and Buddhists in general are much more open to listening to the gospel than most Americans are, because they want to learn. It doesn't mean that they want to accept it or to believe it, but they want to learn about Christianity because they're trying to become more global in their thinking and want to understand. As a matter of fact, in most of the schools in Thailand, we get invited by teachers to come in and teach about Christianity, and they give us full freedom to share the gospel in the classroom, which you can't even do here in the United States anymore.
Wow.
So we have great opportunities, and when I was in Thailand, people were asking all the time. Now, the fact that they ask does not mean that they're going to believe. As a matter of fact, very few of them believe. It's very difficult for them to fully grasp the idea of grace. And that seems to be the biggest problem, because they've been steeped in this idea of making merit. And to think that you can receive salvation for free is so difficult to understand.
Wow. It's amazing. One of our questions here is, do you know of any movements to Christ among Buddhists? Any specific movements that have...
Well, I was speaking with our field director in Thailand, and he believes that a movement has just begun in Thailand. As they've been looking at the last 5 years, I think, the rate of growth of the church in Thailand and the number of Christians seems to indicate that they're on a path to a movement, but I'm not sure if it fully qualifies by all the, the technical components. I don't know. Also in Mongolia, I would say that is probably the place where Buddhism has, at least the gospel has affected Buddhism the most. I mean, the growth of the church in Mongolia has been absolutely phenomenal over the past 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. Another question we have, you had mentioned about partnering with churches, reaching Buddhists, maybe in Indonesia. Could you explain more what opportunities there might be for partnerships? Are there specific examples that you could share about partnership opportunities, Steve?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I could tell you a specific partnership. We are working with over 100 people groups in East Asia.
OMF is.
And almost every one of those is seeking partners. And so we're trying to figure out really how do we work more closely with churches and partner with them to work alongside us. You know, missions in this 21st century has been changing a lot. In the past, we didn't have the communication abilities, the travel abilities that we have today. It was very difficult for churches to become involved. But today, opportunities abound. I think if the person that asked that question is interested in a specific area of East Asia and was looking for specific opportunities, I would be happy to try and research that with that person.
Are there short-term opportunities available also, or is it mostly long-term? Is there?
Oh, no. Yeah, no, there's a lot of short-term opportunities. We partner with churches to send, you know, what we're looking for is actually churches that want to perhaps adopt a people group and to be sending short-term teams to the same place every year and be trying to work alongside our missionaries and helping them achieve their goals rather than just going out to see what's going on. And so we see long-term partnerships, you know, where you have repetitive short-term trips over a period of 10, 20 years as being much more productive than just having different short-term teams coming to a field and, you know, just doing the same things over and over again.
Wonderful. That's great. And Steve's contact information is there. You can certainly contact him if you're interested in exploring any of those opportunities. Steve, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit. We have a question here about using the mirror and not a hammer. Are there any specific ways that you could suggest on how to use the mirror concept instead of a hammer, like Bible thumping, which we tend to probably associate that with?
Yeah, I think using the mirror, you know, when you look in a mirror, you see yourself. And so any question, like I think questions are good ways to use a mirror. And, you know, when you enter into dialogue, to be trying to really get a picture of what that person, what's going on in that person's heart. Every Buddhist is struggling with certain ideas and concepts, even in Buddhism, and trying to help identify what those struggles are and what the contradictions are is what it is to be a mirror to that person. And so I'm not sure if I could give you any specific examples right off the top of my head, but it just involves a lot of personal dialogue with that person, and it takes time. It's like painting a picture. You need a lot of time to do that, a lot of reflection and looking back and forth.
Wow. And so building that trust relationship is probably pretty important.
Yes, very much so.
So in building those trust relationships and everything being based on merit to the Buddhist, I would think that they kind of look at Christians in a pretty, like under a microscope.
Yeah. One of the problems is that when we talk about Christianity, they often view us as being unenlightened. You know, because we talk about God loving, for example. You know, that's totally contrary to the Enlightenment idea and detachment. And you know, so it almost looks like God is unenlightened to them.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's very hard to penetrate their philosophy and help them see that. You know, somebody once said that, you know, Buddhism is really Satan's masterpiece in terms of, you know, philosophical thinking, and he counters almost everything that we believe in Christianity and everything that Jesus taught.
Great.
Except for the moral principles. Those are the same.
Like, okay, that was great. Thank you so much. We have a question. How do you take a Buddhist who thinks it's bad or evil to be who they are in all their desires and need for love, and has been kind of squashing that their whole life, and take them to know that there is a God who loves them and wants to have a relationship with them?
Well, I think it begins by us loving them. Very often, you know, if you could imagine a culture where love is not highly valued. Um, even in living in Thailand amongst Buddhist people, I found even the love between the husband and wife was very, very shallow.
Mm.
It seemed to it seemed to be more of a selfish thing,
Wow.
and I very rarely met a couple that I thought had a really good, strong marriage. And so one of when we come in and we demonstrate that we have a strong marriage relationship,
Mm.
we really love one another, and they get to see a higher level of love and how love actually uh, brings contentment and peace rather than this inward navel gazing, which actually creates a lot of confusion. I was talking with a actually a psychiatrist one time in Thailand, a Thai psychiatrist, who told me that Thai Buddhist priests have a very high level of mental illness because of the inward nature of their trying to eliminate these desires and passions and are not able to do it, and so they
Oh,
suffer from guilt and they don't know how to. Can you imagine trying to eliminate
no.
love, trying to eliminate desire for anything material, uh, even to have relationships. So to the point where some priests will actually, like in where we lived in Lopburi, there was a cave, and there was a monastery in that cave, and the reason the monastery was built there was because a priest had gone in and lived in this cave for, I don't know, 10 years or something,
Oh my
and
goodness.
that cave, like actually thousands of bats lived in that cave. And, because he was trying to eliminate this desire, and he tried to separate and detach himself from the world. And so you could see how that could play a tremendous have emotional implications to that person's life. And so
Mm.
seeing love is something that I think would really help them understand the gospel better.
Wow. That was a really great question and something that God, He gave us those desires. It makes me sad. Um, that something to struggle with to eliminate that from your life. Wow. I have so many great questions coming in, Steve. Are there any specific tracks that were effective for Buddhists becoming Christians?
I'm sorry, any specific what?
The question is tracks that were effective. Any,
Oh, I see. You mean just like pamphlets, giving out pamphlets and things?
yes, that's what I believe she means.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Um, well, yeah, the interesting thing here is in the United States, we don't tend to use tracts very much, but we did use it quite a bit in Thailand because they were a good form of communication, and most people would accept them. We would go to fairs and actually give out thousands and thousands of tracts, and people would take them. They would want them, and they wouldn't throw them out. They would just take them home. There was one in particular that I remember, and what it had was how to escape the cycle of birth, suffering, and death. And they because the Buddhists believe that life just keeps going around and round, and so this particular track had a spiral rather than a circle, and it showed beginning in the center with sin, and it just sort of went around, and it shows that the end of the spiral is actually salvation and an eternity with God. And I think that was a good picture for many Buddhists to see that there is another escape from the cycle of suffering and death than what is claimed in Buddhism. I don't remember what that track was called, but that was the one that I liked the most.
Well, we'll see if we can find it, if we can look it up, and if we can find that, we can email that resource, the name of that, to everyone registered for
Yeah,
today's webinar.
that was actually written in Thai, so I'm not sure
Oh, maybe.
it's in English. I don't know of any English tracks that were
Okay.
made for Buddhists because we don't tend to use them here that much. But
Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, we'll try. If we can't find it, if we can, though, we'll definitely share that resource. I have a very specific question. Um, here. What do Buddhists consider to be meritorious or non-meritorious in this life that will qualify them for a better or worse reincarnation in the next life?
Well, they like we have the Ten Commandments. They also have commandments as well. And the average person, just has 5 commandments that they're expected to follow, and they're very similar to ours. Not to kill anybody, not to commit adultery, not to steal or lie or cheat. And then, as you become a priest, then you have you move to something like 21 laws, and then there are different levels of priesthood, where if you're up in the top levels of priesthood, you have literally thousands and thousands of laws and things that you must obey in order to gain merit. To break any of the laws, especially the 5 first ones, would be to create demerit. Some of the top ones would be, even like for priests, like what time you can eat your lunch or your meals, would be counted as meritorious. And so they have, literally hundreds and hundreds of different laws that produce merit, and laws that would create demerit if you didn't follow them.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. We still have so many great questions coming in. Let's see. Have you noticed any pattern of certain truths about God or passages to Buddhists that resonate with them in becoming a follower of Jesus? Are there specific passages that you have found that have really helped in
Yeah.
sharing Christ with them? Something that just helps them understand?
Yeah, I think there. I don't know that they're sort of universal passages, but there are certain passages that you could use, for example, about reincarnation. Hebrews 9:27, as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment, could be used.
Mm-hmm.
Romans 1:20, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Speaking about the creation of God, talking about Colossians 1:15 to 17. The book of Colossians is actually full of very relevant passages. As a matter of fact, the book of Colossians is probably the most important book in the Bible for the Buddhist, if you want to address things like Colossians 1:15 to 17. He is the image of the invisible God, the born over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth. And it's interesting when Buddhists become Christians, they almost always begin their prayers with, God, our Father, who creator of heaven and earth, because this idea of God creating the world and not having this impersonal creation is very powerful for them. So I would say those were some of them. And Titus 3, 4, and 5, he saved us not because of righteous things which we have done, but because of his mercy. He saved us through the washing of rebirth and renewal by the Holy Spirit. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, that's by grace that you've been saved. So some of those passages that talk about grace and not being able to save yourself through your own actions and your own good works are all very good passages to use with Buddhists.
Great. Those are great examples. Thank you so much. We have time, I think, for one last question. I have a question here about how do Buddhists reconcile reincarnation when there are many more creatures, peoples, and animals now than ever before?
I don't know that they actually try and answer that question.
Okay.
But because I think they also in some forms of Buddhism, they actually believe that you can actually become a spirit, and there's sort of an intermediate stage. So you can become a spirit first, so that you could go to a spirit stage before you actually come back to the world. They would also say that, if you're reincarnated as an ant or as a some kind of insect, how do you quantify that? How do you measure how many of those there are in the world? Because those could be reincarnated people as well.
Wow. Okay, great. We have
Even bacteria that we breathe is living.
That's great. We still have a few questions remaining, but we're going to have to shut down for today. I just want to thank you, Steve, so much. I'm going to list these questions out, and we'll see if we can get some responses emailed to those individuals who still have some questions outstanding. We have just some really good questions, and we're unable to get to all of them today. Steve, I just want to thank you for coming today and sharing this information. If someone is interested in contacting OMF and maybe interested in some short-term, long-term partnerships, they can contact you at your email address right there. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Or they can go to info@omf.org, and that's, that would, for general questions, that would be good.
Good, good. That's wonderful. Also, I just want to let you know about 1615, our resources coming up for next year. We have the mission table. We have a whole new season starting in 2016. You can go to missiontable.org and sign up for updates about the next mission table episodes that will be coming. That's a resource from 1615. We'll have a whole new lineup of webinars for 2016 starting in January, and we'll send out emails about that also, but you can always come to our website at 1615.org and check things out. We list all our resources. We try to get everything up for the year so everyone can pick and choose which webinars they'd like to watch. Also, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll have it up on our website under the Resources tab. If you'd like to share that with someone else or listen to it again. If you'd like a copy of Steve's PowerPoint presentation or anything, just email me, Tricia Morris at 1615.org, or you can just do info at 1615.org, and that will be fine. We appreciate you all signing on today, and thanks again, Steve, for sharing with us today.
My pleasure, Tricia.
Thank you, and I'm Tricia Morris for 1615, and we thank you for listening.